Welcome to Hello Port Hueneme. I'm your host Tom Dunn, and we are doing another Mayor's Corner with Mayor Tom Figg. Welcome again.
Hi Tom, good morning.
Good morning. We're going to talk about the May 1st City Council meeting and review what went on there. And Tom's going to explain some of the budget items that were discussed and what the city is trying to do and what they're looking towards different things they can do to restore our economic situation. First of all, we start off with a inspiration which is called Port Hueneme Pride, and we present a certificate of merit to people that have gone beyond the norm to help the city of Port Hueneme and do good for it. And at this meeting, we honored 4 young women that go to Hueneme High School. Would you care to tell us a little bit about what they did?
Well, first, as I mentioned at the council meeting, I was particularly gratified to be a part of this ceremony because my 2 sons graduated from Hueneme High, and it's always special that something good happens in your backyard, and that's how I look at Hueneme High School. Once a Viking, always a Viking. These 4 girls had been together for 3 to 4 years on the same tennis program team at Hueneme High, and with the mentoring of their coach, Walter Moody, they went from being, unfamiliar with how to use a racket to being considered among the top players in the county, and they stuck together as a group, the 4 girls. Here they are now in their senior year, ready to graduate, and again, Walter Moody, not just as a teacher and a coach, but as a mentor, encouraged the girls to take a look at college opportunities, and one of the 4 girls took it upon themselves to search out what was available. And again, with the help of their coach and talking with the athletic program of the university that they were looking at, all 4 girls were offered academic scholarships. And what's special about that is that even though that they may be very skilled in their sports, their athletics, they're being recognized for their academics. All of these girls were making a GPA average of above 3.6. And the beauty is that they're able to stick together and go to the same university. Now, I know that there was some apprehension. I think some of the parents were, gosh, we hate to see you go that far. But again, they recognize this is an opportunity of a lifetime. And they encourage the girls, don't worry about the distance. This is an adventure of your life. And so it was that kind of uplifting presentation, the 4 girls that we recognized, and then Walter Moody. And Tom, I give you, kudos for bringing this to our attention, because Hueneme Pride is such an important way to go above and beyond the business of the city. It's to bring attention to these kinds of accomplishments, and we should all celebrate what it means to the community. It brings great favor to the community, and we all should be proud. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, and for that matter, you're the kind of the mastermind of the whole concept of the Pride program as part of the city's inspiration. Typically, or years past, the inspiration was used to maybe acknowledge a date in history and contributors that really weren't necessarily community-based, and you've changed that into something to celebrate the community. And I just, again, kudos for doing so.
Thank you very much. I think this is our 4th Port Hueneme Pride certificate winners, and on Hello Port Hueneme, we're going to post all 4 of the presentations. We have them recorded so that you can see them if you missed them the first time.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, let's talk about the city council meeting, and one of my favorite things, let's talk about the mid-year budget. That's always exciting.
Yeah, a little dry, but actually very informative. And the mid-year budget process is just to kind of get a pulse on where we stand midterm in a budget period. Have our forecasts of the budget relative to expenditures and revenues actually squared up with reality in actuality. And what we learned, and not necessarily a surprise, is that we're not necessarily right on target. We're a little bit ambitious in our forecasts of revenues, and conversely, we didn't anticipate all the expenditures. Not a big surprise. We're working hard to try to shore up those forecasts so that we don't find a surprise at the end of the year that we're that much further in a deficit condition. So it's an important way to keep us all engaged in how are we doing and what do we need to do if necessary to right the ship. Some of the takeaways that came from this, we're just on the eve of starting our next budget cycle. And so the discussion that occurred on the 1st of May really was to lay the foundation for the next budget period. Some of the things that came into light here on the May 1st meeting is that we have a much better fix on our structural deficit. We're now doing 5-year projections, and it may not seem like good news, but it's good to know what your target is in terms of filling a gap that's reoccurring. And what we found was a budget figure of about $1.3 million a year that we need through a combination of revenue raising and expenditure reductions to achieve what I call a sustainable financial budget. And so it's a challenge, but it's good that we're starting to get down to that level and we have an understanding of what our true challenge is. So that was an important takeaway.
Now this is, the new budget comes out July 1st, and I think this is the first time that you've gone to a 2-year budget projection?
Well, in recent history, when I worked for the city back in the 70s and the 80s, we did have a 2-year cycle. And I can't tell you why that then morphed back to a single year cycle, but there's now a desire to return to a 2-year cycle. There's a lot more cost savings administratively, so you don't have to regenerate these numbers and have to go through these presentations and expend a lot of time and resources when that can be accomplished through a 2-year budget rather than a single-year budget. That doesn't mean that we won't be having periodic reviews of that budget and adjusting it as necessary. But yes, this is the first time in a number of years that we're going to a 2-year cycle.
There's some policy issues that you looked at, and 2 of them were adjusting the reserve requirements. That's pretty interesting how we do it in Port Hueneme and other cities in the county do it. And then also the question of outsourcing some municipal services, which may have a savings or not. That's what the council, I think, is starting to look at in that aspect. Could you tell us a little bit about these 2 issues?
Yeah, let's talk about the reserve policy. The purpose of a reserve is for economic uncertainties, meaning that if a catastrophe was to occur, and a good example was the beach erosion, in which the city had to swallow $2 million of expenses, and that's above and beyond the grant monies the city received from the state and the federal government. And so you draw upon your reserves to pay for those unknown contingencies. This city has been very conservative in years past. The norm in municipal government, at least in California, is a 2-month reserve fund, and that means 2 months of expenditures you have in your budget. You ought to have 2 months coverage.
For the year.
For the year, correct. This city has taken a much more conservative approach and has between 6 and 8 months of coverage. Now, that's good if you are anticipating an extraordinary one-time expense. but not so good if you don't have that reoccurring situation, because you're taking away money that could otherwise be used in general operations.
So it's just sitting somewhere.
It's sitting somewhere. And there's been a discussion by some of our labor units saying, listen, that money ought to be examined and brought into the operational side instead of it being set aside and causing that much more strain on the operating costs of the city. Very legitimate concern. So part of the discussion on the May 1st meeting was, can we ratchet down our reserve policy to help bolster our general fund, but do it in a way that doesn't put us in harm's way? And what the council jointly decided on was a 3-month reserve rather than a 6 to 8 month reserve. And we're still above the average. The average is about 2%.
Of all the cities like us in
Correct.
Ventura
Correct.
and other coastal cities.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're still on the conservative side, but we've freed up some of that reserve money to help bolster our general fund. We're disadvantaged by our location, by our modest demographics, and then we got some added challenges. We have a Navy base. Even though regionally nobody would question the value they bring to the community at large, is that they're competing for our sales dollars. They're a non-tax-paying entity, that is property taxes, and yet our facilities are still being used by those that live on the base. So again, we have this market problem in that we are so separated and isolated with demographics that don't really, they're not necessarily favorable, and then what little opportunity we have to cultivate traditional sources of revenue, sales taxes, property taxes, is affected by the presence of the Navy. So that's one of the things that makes cannabis so attractive to the city from a revenue point of view, is that it's an emerging industry. It's not dependent on those traditional marketing parameters of location, location, location. And we have the opportunity to get out in front of the emerging industry, because right now most of the communities in Ventura County are kind of taking a wait and see. They're sitting on the sidelines and waiting for others to kind of take the initiative. Well, in this case, it's Hueneme.
Just this, I think it was last Friday, I'm glad to see the state is getting involved much more in setting up a couple bureaus to see that the regulations and regulatory statutes are pretty much standard throughout California in the coming future.
Well, it's a combination, and I should have clarified at the beginning. The ordinance that we're processing at present is for medicinal marijuana, and that means it's really limited to a particular target audience, which is those with medical conditions that are properly licensed to receive a cannabis product to assist in their recovery or pain control. So that's what this ordinance does. Now, Prop 64 was approved in November of last year, and that's recreational, adult recreational use. This ordinance is not addressing Prop 64 because that doesn't become really effective until the early part of next year. So what you're seeing at the state level is a desire to reconcile the regulations that pertain to medicinal purposes versus recreational. And it's smart that they're doing that in advance of the law becoming effective in January of next year for recreational purposes. We'll continue to have to track that process. We'll have to update our ordinance to accommodate recreational, and I think by getting out in front of the process, we'll be well positioned to transition from medicinal to recreational.
Well, I really want to thank you for talking about the probably two most important things the city faces. One is the budget, and two is how to increase revenue. And the cannabis market is one I think they'll do very well, and that you can explain it to the citizens, and we'll do it as often as we can. Thank you again
Oh,
for,
absolutely.
for
My
doing
pleasure.
that. And thank you guys for watching the Mayor's Corner, and we'll have another issue on this in about 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.